I stood at the long walnut dining table in my home above the Willamette River, the October light cooling to silver behind the fir trees. Melissa had just finished a speech about protecting the Gardner legacy, chin high, eyes bright with certainty. Her friends, our neighbors, even a few board members who'd drifted over after a gallery opening downtown, had nodded along. It was a speech rehearsed for years, the practiced elegance of someone who believed a legacy was the same as a last name. I placed the envelope on the table, right between the crystal water pitcher and Melissa's perfectly manicured hand. "Open it," I said. She didn't. She stared at me like I had set a snake in front of her. Only then did she notice them in the corner. Jacob, thin but steady, one arm around baby Hannah's stroller, Margaret Olson standing beside him like a lighthouse made of linen and backbone. Everyone turned to look. No one knew him yet, but I did. I knew him because of my brother's eyes, because of the way he kept himself to the edges of a room like he wasn't entitled to air. "Mother, what is this?" Melissa asked, voice ironed flat. "This," I said, sliding the envelope forward, "is your grandfather's sealed letter. The one you told Jacob never existed. The one you never wanted me or anyone to see." Her color faltered. There was a ripple at the table, the sound of people sitting very still. I looked at Jacob. "You read it?" He hesitated, then reached for it with hands that still shook sometimes. He broke the seal. Inside were 2 pages on yellowing stationery and a copy of the codicil. My father's handwriting looked like fence posts marching across the page, certain, spare, impossible to ignore. Jacob read aloud, his voice rough but clear. "To my grandchildren, known and unknown. If life separates us, my estate will find the one who protects the vulnerable, the one who builds a door when the world gives them a wall." No one breathed. Not when I turned to Melissa and said, gently but unmistakably, "You told him I was dead." Not when Jacob's eyes shone and he pressed his lips together as if holding in a tide. Not when Hannah sneezed and laughed and the sound punctured the room like sunlight through clouds. "And the trust?" Melissa whispered, glancing at the last page as if it might sprout fangs. "Bequeathed," I answered, "to the grandchild who proves stewardship through action, not status, and who accepts the guardian's invitation." I looked at Jacob and smiled. Welcome home. The room didn't applaud. It didn't riot. It did something worse to Melissa. It went completely. Devastatingly quiet. People say Portland is a city stitched together by bridges, but I think it's held together by basements, the damp kind beneath old homes, where secrets mildew and old furniture waits to be remembered. That's where I found Jacob, in a basement apartment off S.E. Woodstock. Ceilings too low, a single bulb humming, the air forever chilly. He stood in the doorway like a question mark, a man made smaller by other people's stories about him. He had a baby girl strapped to his chest in a soft carrier, Hannah. Dark hair, bright, wet eyes, a bubble of laughter that arrived like a miracle and made the whole room rearrange itself. He didn't trust me. Why would he? He'd been told I was dead. He'd been told I didn't want to be found. He'd been told the Gardner money was gone, that the family no longer had space for outliers, especially the son of my estranged brother, Ethan. "Who told you I was dead?" I asked, though in my bones I already knew. "My cousin," he said. "Melissa, my daughter." He said it without rage, just resignation, the kind that settles in after too many doors shut in your face. He explained that he'd come to Portland chasing a job that evaporated at the interview, that Hannah's mother, overwhelmed and frightened, had left weeks ago, that he'd been sleeping in the basement of a sagging turn-of-the-century fourplex because the landlady felt sorry for him and the baby, because the rent was nothing if he fixed leaky pipes and shoveled the sidewalk. "You can hate me," I told him, "but let me help the baby." "Why?" he asked, rocking Hannah instinctively. "What do you get out of it?" "A chance," I said. "To do what your grandfather asked me to do a long time ago." He blinked. "My grandfather?" "My father," I clarified. "Your grandfather, too." He looked down at Hannah, then back up. "If you're lying, I've had enough lies for a lifetime," I said. "Come with me, tonight." He didn't say yes. He said, "Let me pack the formula," and that was enough. I carried the bag. He carried the baby. We rose from the basement into the damp Portland twilight, and I felt for the first time in years like someone had unlocked a window in my chest. I drove them to my house, an old river-facing property in Dunthorpe. Not a palace, but gracious and patient with a garden that keeps its own counsel. Margaret Olson, my neighbor and friend who can quiet a storm by simply setting tea on a table, met us at the door. She took one look at Jacob's hollowed-out cheeks and said, "You'll eat first? We'll talk after." And so, in the kitchen where my father had once lectured me about duty and dignity, a young man who didn't believe in either anymore fed his daughter, and I pretended not to cry at the sight. That night was 6 months ago. Now here we were, with the truth finally laid bare, with the walls of lies Melissa had built crumbling around her. I hadn't wanted it to happen this way. I had hoped somehow that my daughter would find her way back to the values my father had instilled in me. That she would see Jacob and Hannah not as threats to her position but as family, the very definition of what the Gardner legacy should mean. But sometimes hope isn't enough. Sometimes the truth needs witnesses. When I was a girl, the Gardners were already a story in Portland. Old money, older morals. My father, Walter Gardner, built our name on lumber, rental properties, and the belief that a good family is measured not by how it shines in public, but by who sits warm and safe at its table. He was strict, fair, unwavering. He taught me to balance ledgers before I learned to drive. He taught my brother Ethan to show up early and to mean what he said. Then life got complicated in the way that families do. Ethan loved wildly and too young, moved away, came back, left again. There was a son somewhere in that swirl Jacob with a mother who didn't want anything from us and a father who didn't know how to stay. We didn't meet Jacob when he was little. We sent help that was returned. We called numbers that never picked up. I wrote letters that came back stamped undeliverable. At the end, when my father was tired and his handwriting quivered, he asked me to do one thing if we ever found Ethan's boy. Tell him he has a home. Tell him the Gardner name is a porch light, not a padlock. He added a codicil to his will, a quiet one, known to me and the attorney, that tied stewardship of the trust not to blood alone, but to character witnessed through action. He believed money should magnify compassion, not entitlement. He told me, "You'll know which one it is." He passed. Grief made everything louder and also, mysteriously, more muffled. I raised Melissa with everything I had: time, attention, the kind of encouragement that tries to fill the crater a missing grandparent leaves. Melissa grew brilliant and stylish and careful with appearances. She said all the right things and believed them until they didn't align with what she wanted. Years trickled. The Gardner portfolio modernized. I did the meetings, the property walks in the drizzle, the negotiations over cappuccinos on NW 23rd. I also did denial about Ethan, about the lost branch of our family tree. Then, 6 months before I found Jacob, I learned the truth. Melissa had known where he was. She'd been the one messaging him from a family liaison email account. She'd told him I had died. She'd told him the trust was closed. She'd told him if he came around, reporters would call him a grifter and the story would tarnish the brand. She had done this, she said, to protect the legacy, a sentence that still makes me taste rust. The discovery came by accident. A misfiled email, a reply sent to my account instead of the fake one she'd created. Words that stopped my heart. As previously discussed, Mrs. Gardner's passing means there are no remaining provisions for Ethan's son. I confronted her in her sleek downtown office. Walls of glass and abstract art that cost more than some of our tenants made in a year. "Who died?" I asked, placing the printed email on her desk. She didn't flinch. She'd always been good at that, the perfect poise, the calculated pause. "It was easier," she said finally. "Cleaner." "Cleaner than what?" "Than telling him the truth. That he has family. That I've been looking for him." "You weren't looking that hard," she said. And the worst part was that she was right. I had let myself believe the search was impossible, that my brother's son was unreachable. It was comfortable, that belief. It let me sleep. "How long have you known where he is?" I asked. 3 years, she admitted. He reached out when Hannah was born. He thought maybe his grandfather's estate might help with medical bills. The room seemed to tilt. 3 years, I repeated. "And you told him I was dead." "I told him what would make him stop looking," she said. Her voice softened, trying to make me understand. "Mom, you don't save a brand by opening doors to strangers who share your last name." "He's not a stranger," I said. "He's family, but the damage was done." The emails existed. The lie had wedged itself between us. I fired the PR firm she'd used and shut down the fake address. I also stopped pretending I could fix Melissa by being better at speeches. I began looking for Jacob, Not with a private investigator and a jet, but with a worn paper trail and a stubborn heart. It took 3 months of quiet searching. I found him through a rental application he'd submitted to one of our own buildings, a building Melissa had rejected him from without telling me. His application listed previous addresses, including the basement in Southeast Portland. The day I knocked on his door was gray and ordinary, the kind of day that doesn't announce itself as life-changing until you're already in the middle of it. That first night in my house, Jacob slept in the east guest room. Hannah slept like only babies and saints can. I didn't sleep. In the morning, Margaret made pancakes and somehow convinced Jacob to pour batter, to become a person who cooks without realizing he's doing it. That afternoon, I took a deep breath and called Melissa. "I found him," I said. Silence. Then, "You had no right to go behind my back." "Behind whose?" I asked. "He's my nephew." "And a liability," she snapped. "Don't be naive. The board will panic if you start playing charity with the estate. You made me the visible face of this family because I understand how fragile respect is." I hung up when I felt my voice climbing the staircase to places it didn't belong. The next 48 hours were a tangle of small, tender things, getting Jacob a clean hoodie and new socks, finding Hannah's giggle button, showing Jacob the backyard path to the riverbank, and a series of bigger, harder ones. Melissa arrived anyway. She stood in my doorway and announced she'd booked a brunch with stakeholders, and it would be smart to keep Jacob invisible for now. "We're having brunch here," I said. "Mother," she exhaled, as if she had been patient for years and I was testing the final thread. "You cannot introduce this boy like a stunt." "This boy?" Jacob repeated quietly from behind me. And that's how we ended up here, with a dining room full of witnesses, with my father's letter finally in the open, with a silence that spoke volumes more than any speech Melissa had ever crafted. The truth was out. Now we had to live with it. After Jacob finished reading my father's letter, the silence in the dining room stretched like taffy. I watched faces shift from shock to understanding, to something that looked remarkably like relief, as if a burden had been lifted from shoulders that weren't even aware. They'd been carrying weight. Margaret was the first to move. She pulled an extra chair to the table beside Jacob. A neighbor placed a hand on Melissa's shoulder, not to scold, but to steady. Jacob bent to unstrap Hannah from her stroller and let her bang a spoon on the table like a drummer announcing a parade down a brand new street. "The codicil," Melissa said finally, her voice like thin ice. "How long have you known about it?" "Since Dad died," I answered. "It was never a secret from me. Only from you. And you never thought to mention it?" "I never thought I'd need to," I said. "I believed you understood what our family stands for." A woman who'd been at our Thanksgiving table for 20 years leaned across her husband and looked at Hannah. "She looks like Patty did at that age," she said. "Same dimple when she laughs." Melissa's smile went tight as a bowline knot. "Mother, we didn't discuss—" "We'll discuss now," I said. Together, I turned to the small gathering. My father, Walter Gardner, believed that money was a tool, not a trophy. He built this family's wealth to shelter people, not to shine for its own sake. The trust he established was designed to pass to the grandchild who demonstrated true stewardship, compassion in action, not status for show. Jacob bounced Hannah gently on his knee as she reached for a strawberry. "I didn't come here for money," he said quietly. "I came because she deserves better than a basement with black mold and a dad who can't find steady work." "You came because you were invited," I corrected him. "Because this is where you belong." "This is absurd," Melissa said, standing suddenly. "We have responsibilities to shareholders, to the board. We can't just upend everything because what?" I asked. "Because my nephew needs help? Because my brother's grandchild deserves the same chance you had? Or because you've spent years crafting an image that doesn't include inconvenient relatives?" Several guests shifted uncomfortably. A board member with silver temples cleared his throat. "Melissa, you told us Patricia had determined there were no valid claims from Ethan's side of the family." Melissa's face flushed. "There weren't any valid claims. There still aren't. Jacob has no experience in property management, no background in finance, Neither did I when your grandfather started teaching me," I interrupted. "Neither did you when I brought you into the business. Experience can be gained. Character is either there or it isn't." Hannah dropped the strawberry on the floor and laughed. Jacob immediately bent to clean it up, apologizing. "Don't apologize," Margaret said. "It's just a strawberry. The rug has seen worse." I watched Melissa's eyes track the small interaction. She saw what I saw. Jacob's instinct to clean up messes he hadn't made, to take responsibility without being asked. "May I speak with you privately?" she asked me, her voice tightly controlled. "In the library, beneath the oil portrait of my grandfather, who offered no help in modern arguments." She broke the polished surface. "You're replacing me," she said, not crying and somehow more heartbreaking because of it. "I'm inviting him," I said. "I am not ejecting you. But I will never again let fear and image determine who is family." She flinched. "You think I did it for status. I did it for us, for you. Every time I walk into a room, I carry the Gardner name and the expectation of what it means. I thought I was protecting it. By pretending I was dead?" I asked, soft. "By telling a young man who needed us that he wasn't welcome?" She closed her eyes. I was wrong. It wasn't a confession meant for policing. It was a small, aching truth. But truth has consequences. We stepped back into the dining room together. She didn't interrupt when I took Jacob's hand, the way you steady someone when they are about to take the first steps after a long illness, and said, "If you want this, I'll train you." Not in logos and launches. In budgets and buildings and the smell of a hallway after the carpet's been shampooed and the tenant says thank you because you replaced their broken heater on a Sunday. He squeezed back. "I don't know anything about any of that." "You know how to show up," I said. "You know how to hold a baby and listen before speaking. The rest is teachable," he nodded. Okay, I said, and felt my father shrug from somewhere beyond the portrait glass as if to say, "Well, then get to it." The guests slowly filtered out, each pausing to introduce themselves to Jacob, to touch Hannah's tiny hand or comment on her eyes. No one mentioned the trust or the codicil again. They didn't need to. The letter had been read aloud. The truth had been witnessed. That was enough. That night, after Jacob and Hannah had gone back to the basement apartment to gather their belongings, Melissa stayed behind. She sat in the kitchen where she'd once done homework, her blazer removed, looking smaller somehow. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said. "I know," I replied. "Will he hate me forever?" I considered this. I don't think Jacob hates easily. But trust? That will take time to rebuild, she nodded. "What can I do?" "Start by telling the truth," I said. "Always, even when it's inconvenient. Even when it doesn't photograph well for the annual report." She left shortly after, driving back to her modern loft downtown. I stood in the doorway watching her taillights disappear around the curve of the driveway. The night air smelled of moss and river water. I thought about my father, about Ethan, about the branches of family trees that bend and sometimes break, but still belong to the same roots. I thought about how easily we convince ourselves that lies are necessary, that walls keep us safe, that appearances matter more than substance. And I thought about how a baby's laugh can cut through all that pretense, like sunlight through stained glass. Tomorrow would be complicated. There would be papers to sign, arrangements to make, explanations to offer. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt like the guardian my father had trusted me to be. Jacob moved into the East guest room the next day. He arrived with 2 duffel bags, a portable crib, and Hannah strapped to his chest. Everything he owned in the world fit into the back of my Volvo. I showed him the room cream walls, tall windows overlooking the garden, a crib I'd ordered rushed overnight. He set Hannah down on the thick carpet and watched her immediately roll over and attempt to eat a tassel from the curtain. "This is too much," he said. "It's exactly enough," I replied. That first week was a dance of awkward gratitude and careful boundaries. Jacob insisted on helping with dishes after every meal. He made his bed with hospital corners. He asked permission to use the washing machine. When I told him he didn't need to ask, he looked at me like I was speaking a language he didn't quite understand. "Where I come from," he said, folding a tiny pink onesie. "Nothing is free. This isn't charity," I told him. "It's family." "Family," he repeated, as if testing the word for hidden catches. Margaret came by almost daily, bringing books for Hannah and recipes for Jacob. She taught him how to make soup that could stretch for days, how to tell when bread was properly kneaded, how to hold a knife so it didn't fight him. He soaked up these small lessons like desert soil after rain-eager, grateful, transformed by each drop. On the 10th day, Melissa called. Her voice was cool, professional. "I've scheduled a meeting with the board for Friday. They'll want to meet Jacob. Is that wise?" I asked. "It's very soon. Better to address it directly than let rumors spread," she said. "I've prepared a statement acknowledging the situation and outlining a transition plan." A transition to what? I asked. To incorporating Jacob into the Gardner Trust operations, she said, as if it were obvious. We need to control the narrative. This isn't a narrative, Melissa. This is a person. 2 people counting Hannah, she sighed. Mother, I'm trying to fix what I broke. Let me do this. I agreed to the meeting but insisted Jacob have time to prepare. That night, I sat with him at the kitchen table after Hannah was asleep, explaining the structure of the Gardner Trust, the properties, the investments, the charitable arm, the responsibilities. Your grandfather built something meant to last generations, I told him. Not just buildings, but a philosophy. He believed prosperity came with duty. Every Gardner tenant has heat in winter and cool air in summer. Every Gardner employee has health care and paid leave. Every Gardner building has green space and safety features beyond what codes require. Jacob listened intently, taking notes in a spiral notebook with a chewed pen. And my father, he wasn't interested in any of this? I hesitated. Ethan was restless. He saw the business as a cage, not a calling. He wanted to find his own way. And did he? Find his way? I thought of my brother, brilliant, erratic, forever promising to call next week. I don't know, I admitted. We lost touch after your mother left him. Jacob's pen stilled. He told me she died when I was 3. The floor seemed to shift beneath me. What? My mother? He said she had cancer. That's why he was raising me alone. I closed my eyes. Another lie. Another wall between people who should have been connected. Jacob, your mother left when you were small, but she didn't die. At least, not that we ever heard. He set the pen down carefully as if it might shatter. So she could be alive? Somewhere? It's possible, I said. I don't know where she is now. He was quiet for a long time. Then, does everyone in this family lie about death? I reached across the table and took his hand. It was calloused, the nails short and clean. A working hand. Not anymore, I promised. Not in this house. Friday arrived with rain that turned the windows into rivers. Jacob wore a button-down shirt borrowed from the gardener's son and chinos that were slightly too short. Hannah wore a dress Margaret had bought with tiny flowers embroidered around the collar. They looked like what they were, people doing their best with what they had. Melissa met us in the lobby of the Gardner building downtown, all glass and reclaimed timber. She wore charcoal gray and pearls, her hair swept into an immaculate knot. She bent to Hannah's level and offered a small stuffed elephant. Hello, Hannah, she said formally. I'm your cousin Melissa. Hannah grabbed the elephant and immediately tried to eat its trunk. She's teething, Jacob explained. Aren't we all? Melissa replied. And for a moment I glimpsed the dry humor she'd had as a teenager, before polish became her personality. The boardroom was intimidating by design-high ceilings. A massive table of black walnut, views of the city and the distant mountains. 8 people sat waiting, their expressions carefully neutral. They were the stewards of the Gardner legacy bankers, lawyers, old friends of my father, people who had known our family for decades. Melissa introduced Jacob with surprising grace. This is Jacob Gardner, my cousin, son of Ethan Gardner. He and his daughter Hannah have recently reconnected with our family, and in accordance with my grandfather's wishes, they will be joining the family business. A silver-haired man at the end of the table raised his eyebrows. In what capacity? Before Melissa could answer, Jacob spoke. In whatever capacity I can be useful, he said. I've worked construction, maintenance, customer service. I can learn. I'm good with my hands, and I understand what it means to need a safe place to live. The room shifted slightly. This wasn't the entitled air they might have feared. This was something else entirely. The questions came rapid fire after that. Where had he been living? What was his education? Did he understand the scale of the Gardner holdings? Through it all, Jacob answered honestly, without shame or bravado. When Hannah fussed, he soothed her without losing his train of thought. When asked about his vision for the trust, he said simply, I believe homes should be places people can afford to live in, not just invest in. It was like watching a tree bend in strong wind, flexible, but rooted. By the end of the meeting, something had changed in the room. Not wholesale approval, but a willingness to wait and see. As we left, Melissa touched Jacob's elbow. You did well, she said. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. I didn't do it for you. I know, she said. That's why it worked. The months that followed were not cinematic. They were real. Jacob moved into a modest duplex in Selwood, a short walk from a small park that Hannah decided was hers. Each morning, he arrived at the gardener office at 7:30 a.m. with a thermos and a notebook, ready to learn. I started him with the basics: how to read a property assessment, how to review maintenance requests, how to tell the difference between a contractor who knew their business and one who just knew how to talk. Buildings are like bodies, I told him. They tell you when something's wrong, but you have to learn their language first. He absorbed everything with quiet determination. When a tenant called at midnight about a burst pipe, Jacob went with the maintenance supervisor to see the repair firsthand, standing in ankle-deep water asking questions about shut-off valves and pressure regulators. When a roof needed inspection, he climbed the ladder himself, taking photos of cracked flashing and worn shingles. His hands, already calloused from years of manual labor, grew confident with tools and blueprints. Melissa kept her distance at first, watching from the periphery like someone studying a new species. She had stepped back from the spokesperson role as she'd promised, focusing instead on operations spreadsheets, contracts, the invisible machinery that kept the Gardner Trust running. She hated it initially. There was no glory in backroom work, no photo opportunities or press releases. But as weeks passed, I noticed a subtle shift. Her shoulders relaxed. Her voice lowered from its perpetual presentation pitch. She started coming to meetings without makeup, her hair in a simple ponytail. One rainy Thursday, I found her and Jacob huddled over a property ledger, arguing about weatherproofing standards for a renovation project. The city code only requires R19 insulation, Melissa was saying. But the energy savings from R30 would pay for itself in 3 years, Jacob countered. And the tenants would have lower heating bills from day one. It's an additional $40,000 up front. It's the right thing to do, he said, not backing down. Would you want your daughter living in a place that cut corners on keeping her warm? Melissa looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. R30 it is. Later I asked her about the exchange. She shrugged, almost embarrassed. He was right. I got caught up in the balance sheet and forgot about the people. That's why you two need each other, I said. You see the forest, he sees the trees. She gave me a sidelong glance. Is that your way of saying I should trust him more? It's my way of saying you're both gardeners, I replied. Different branches, same roots. In those early months, Jacob went with Margaret to deliver blankets at a community center one rainy Saturday and came back talking. Not about charity, but about systems. How we could prevent eviction through bridge grants. How a fixed boiler was sometimes more humane, more useful than a photo op. He learned that affordable wasn't a price, it was a promise. I taught him the ledger as my father taught me. He taught me 1,000 small things my father never knew: how to install a child safety latch properly, how to accept help without tallying debts, how to bounce a baby to a beat only she can hear. Hannah learned to say Nana, and I pretended not to sob in the pantry the first time she said it while reaching for my hair. Spring came. Portland glowed green in that wet, grateful way it has. We opened 3 buildings that had been delayed, each with a plaque that did not say gardener, but did say something my father would have loved. Welcome home. Jacob stood at one doorway for hours, handing out keys, explaining thermostats, showing people how to use the laundry machines without turning their clothes into felt. He wasn't on a stage. He was at a threshold. There's a difference. He knew it. He held it like a responsibility and a joy. The local paper ran a piece with a coy headline about the hidden heir. Jacob brought it to my kitchen table, his face tight with concern. I don't want to be your scandal of the month, he said. You aren't, I told him. You're my family. The paper can call you whatever helps them sell breakfast. We will call you home. What if I mess this up? He asked, vulnerability breaking through his usual calm. What if I can't be what Walter Gardner hoped for? I poured him coffee and sat across from him. My father wasn't looking for perfection. He was looking for heart. For someone who understood that buildings aren't assets, they're shelters. People aren't tenants, they're neighbors. Hannah banged her spoon on her high chair, demanding attention, and Jacob automatically reached to wipe yogurt from her chin. His movements gentle and sure. You already understand the most important part, I said. The rest is just details. In May, we held a small, quiet ceremony, not a reading of a will, but the reading of a letter. In our living room with the windows open to river air, Jacob read my father's words again. Melissa listened. Margaret squeezed my hand. Hannah babbled and clapped for syllables she liked. At the end, Jacob looked up and said, I can't promise I'll be perfect. Good, I replied. Perfect is a lie people use to avoid being honest. After the ceremony, Melissa approached Jacob. I watched from across the room, holding my breath. "I know you don't trust me," she said. "You shouldn't. What I did was unforgivable." Jacob studied her face. "Why did you do it, really?" She looked away. "Because I was afraid. I've spent my whole life trying to be worthy of the Gardner name. Then you appeared and it felt like everything I'd built might not matter anymore." "I never wanted to take anything from you," he said. "I know that now." She hesitated. "I'd like to help if you'll let me. There's a low-income housing project in St. John's that needs restructuring. The numbers don't work with conventional financing, but if we approach it differently..." I watched as they moved to the study, Melissa already pulling out her tablet, Jacob asking questions. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something just as valuable. It was collaboration. Joint custody of the future, as Melissa would later call it. That night, after everyone had gone home, I stood in Hannah's doorway watching her sleep. Jacob came up beside me, his sock feet silent on the hardwood. "She looks like Ethan when she sleeps," I whispered. "That same furrow between the eyebrows." "Do you think he knows about her?" Jacob asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But we could try to find him, if you want." Jacob was quiet for a long time. "Not yet," he finally said. "Let's get our feet under us first," I nodded, understanding. "Some bridges need to be built slowly, with careful attention to foundations." "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For finding us. For bringing us home." I took his hand, this nephew who was becoming something like a son. "Thank you for letting me." Summer arrived with a heat that settled over Portland like a wool blanket. The Willamette River moved slower, the city's pace gentled by the long evening light. Hannah took her first steps in the garden, lurching from the patio chair to my outstretched hands while Jacob recorded every wobbly moment on his phone. She grew curls that spiraled in the humidity and a personality that announced itself with increasing volume. Jacob grew too, though in less visible ways. His confidence expanded to fill the spaces that uncertainty had once occupied. In meetings, he spoke with authority about tenant needs and maintenance priorities. On property visits, he knew which questions to ask, which problems needed immediate attention. He developed a reputation among the maintenance staff as someone who understood their challenges, who would roll up his sleeves rather than just check boxes on an inspection form. Melissa underwent her own transformation. The polished spokesperson veneer gave way to something more authentic. She still dressed impeccably, still commanded attention when she entered a room, but the brittleness was gone. She started bringing homemade cookies to staff meetings, lumpy, imperfect things that tasted like childhood. "My grandmother's recipe," she explained when Jacob raised an eyebrow at the offering. "Mom used to make them with me when I was small." "Before you discovered that carbs were the enemy?" I teased. She smiled ruefully. "Before I discovered that control was an illusion." One Tuesday morning in July, the three of us sat in the conference room reviewing proposals for a new development on the east side. The project would convert an abandoned warehouse into mixed-income apartments with ground-floor retail and a community garden. We could increase the unit count if we reduced the common areas, Melissa suggested, running calculations on her tablet. Jacob shook his head. "People need places to gather, especially in affordable housing. Without community spaces, it's just storage for humans." I watched them debate, each making valid points, neither willing to simply yield. It was exactly what Walter would have wanted: principled disagreement in service of a better outcome. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Channel 8 wants to interview you about the Gardner Trust's new direction. Reporter doing a piece on family businesses. Seems legitimate." I showed the message to Melissa and Jacob. "It's a good opportunity," Melissa said immediately. "Positive press about our commitment to affordable housing." Jacob looked wary. "Or it's someone looking for drama about the hidden heir situation." "Only one way to find out," I said, and agreed to the interview. The reporter, a woman named Christine Wells with sharp eyes and sharper questions, arrived at the Gardner building the following week. She set up in the conference room, cameras positioned to capture the Portland skyline through the windows behind us. "I understand there have been some significant changes in the Gardner Trust leadership recently," she began after preliminary pleasantries. "Evolution, not change," I corrected. "We're honoring my father's vision while adapting to current needs. And that evolution includes bringing in previously unknown family members." Her gaze shifted to Jacob, who sat beside me in a button-down shirt that finally fit him properly. My nephew Jacob has become an invaluable part of our operations, I said. His perspective on housing as a basic right rather than just an investment has strengthened our mission. And Ms. Gardner, she turned to Melissa, how do you feel about sharing responsibilities with a cousin you didn't grow up with? Melissa didn't miss a beat. The Gardner Trust has always been about family, but also about community. Jacob helps us remember that those values aren't separate. The interview continued, with questions about specific projects, about the housing crisis in Portland, about our plans for expansion. Everything seemed to be going well until Christine smiled and said, "One last question. I understand there was some confusion about Jacob's place in the family initially. Can you clarify how that misunderstanding occurred?" The room went still. I felt Melissa tense beside me. "There was no misunderstanding," Jacob said before either of us could respond. "There was a deliberate decision to keep me separate from my family." Christine leaned forward, sensing a story. "A decision made by whom?" Jacob looked at Melissa, then back at the reporter. "By someone who was afraid of change. Who thought they were protecting something valuable." He paused. "But that's in the past. What matters now is what we're building together. So you've forgiven the deception?" Christine pressed. "I'm working on it," Jacob said honestly. "Some days are easier than others. But I've learned that holding on to anger doesn't build anything worth living in." After the reporter left, Melissa remained seated, staring at her hands. "You could have buried me," she said to Jacob. "You had every right to." He shrugged. "What would that have accomplished?" "Justice, maybe," she suggested. "I'm more interested in peace," he replied. "For Hannah's sake, if nothing else." That evening, the three of us sat on my back porch watching Hannah chase fireflies across the lawn. The air smelled of jasmine and distant rain. Melissa had kicked off her heels, her bare feet propped on the railing. "Do you ever wonder about her?" she asked Jacob suddenly. "Hannah's mother?" He nodded. "Every day. Especially when Hannah does something new, takes a step, says a word. I wonder if she'd be proud or sad or regretful. Do you hate her for leaving?" Melissa's voice was careful, neutral. "No," Jacob said after a long moment. "I think she was scared. And when people are scared, they sometimes make decisions that hurt others without meaning to." The words hung in the air between them, an offering, a bridge, a recognition. Melissa's eyes shone in the porch light. "I'm trying to be better," she said quietly. "I know," Jacob replied. "Me too, later." After Jacob had taken Hannah home, Melissa lingered, helping me wash dishes in comfortable silence. "He's a better person than I am," she said finally, drying a wine glass with careful attention. "He's had different lessons," I told her. "Pain can teach compassion if you let it. And what does privilege teach?" I looked at my daughter, brilliant, flawed, finally growing into her full self. "Responsibility, if you're lucky," she nodded, placing the glass in the cabinet. "I want to make things right. Not just with Jacob. With the tenants I treated as numbers, the staff I intimidated, the community I claimed to serve while keeping at arm's length." "Then do it," I said simply. "Not with grand gestures or press releases. With daily choices. With honesty. Is it that simple?" she asked. "It's that simple," I confirmed. "And that difficult." The interview aired the following week. To my surprise, it wasn't sensationalized. Christine had captured the essence of what we were trying to build, a business founded on family values, but extended to create community. The segment ended with a shot of Jacob kneeling beside a tenant's child, explaining how the new playground equipment worked, his face lit with genuine enthusiasm. The Gardner Trust, Christine's voiceover concluded, seems to have rediscovered its heart by expanding its definition of family. Melissa called me after it aired. "Well, that could have been much worse." I laughed. "Is that your version of celebrating a win?" "I'm working on optimism," she said. "It's an acquired taste." That night, I dreamed of my father, not the stern businessman in the portrait, but the man who taught me to paddle a canoe on the Willamette, who explained the difference between Douglas fir and hemlock by having me close my eyes and feel the needles. In the dream, he stood on our porch, looking out at the river, his hands in his pockets. "You found him," he said simply. "Yes," I replied. He nodded, satisfied. "The rest will follow." I woke with tears on my cheeks and a certainty in my heart that we were, at last, on the right path. Autumn painted Portland in amber and rust. The river carried fallen leaves like tiny boats, and the morning fog lingered until noon, wrapping the city in pearl gray silence. Hannah turned one with a small celebration in the backyard. Jacob, Melissa, Margaret, and a handful of tenants from our buildings, who had become something like extended family. She smashed her cake with scientific precision, examining each sticky fingerful before deciding whether to eat it or wear it. She's methodical, Margaret observed. Like her father. God help us all if she inherits the gardener stubbornness too, I said, watching Jacob patiently wiping frosting from Hannah's eyebrows. In the months since the television interview, something had shifted in our family dynamic. The jagged edges had begun to smooth, not from erosion but from careful, deliberate attention like stones in a tumbler, becoming polished through persistent contact. Jacob had settled into his role at the trust with a quiet confidence that reminded me of my father. He'd developed a particular focus on maintenance standards and emergency preparedness, insisting that every gardener property have clear evacuation plans, working generators, and supplies for potential disasters. People don't just need housing, he explained during a board meeting. They need security. They need to know that if something goes wrong, they won't be forgotten. No one argued. The board had come to respect his practical wisdom, his unwavering focus on tenant welfare. Even the most skeptical members had been won over by the results' lower turnover, higher satisfaction scores, stronger community engagement. Melissa had found her own niche, applying her analytical mind and business acumen to financial structures that supported our mission without compromising it. She'd developed innovative financing models for affordable housing that attracted investment without sacrificing accessibility. Her office walls, once adorned with awards and press clippings, now displayed maps of Portland neighborhoods with detailed demographic information and community needs assessments. One crisp October morning, Jacob knocked on my office door, his expression unusually serious. "I need your advice," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I've been thinking about Hannah's mother." My heart tightened. "Have you heard from her?" He shook his head. "No, but Hannah deserves to know her story someday. And I've been wondering if I should try to find her, not to disrupt her life, but to at least have answers when Hannah starts asking questions." I considered his words carefully. "What do you know about her now?" "Not much," he admitted. Allison was working as a barista when we met. She was taking night classes in graphic design. When she got pregnant, she was scared but excited. After Hannah was born, the reality hit her hard. Postpartum depression, maybe, or just the weight of responsibility. She left when Hannah was 8 weeks old. Left a note saying she couldn't do it, that Hannah deserved better than what she could offer. "And you haven't heard from her since?" Not a word. His eyes clouded with old pain. "I don't blame her, not anymore. But I worry about what I'll tell Hannah when she's old enough to understand absence." I thought about my own brother. Ethan, how his absence had shaped our family story. How his son had found his way back despite all the walls built to keep him out. "Truth is usually better than silence," I said finally. "Even difficult truth. Maybe especially then." He nodded, accepting this. "Will you help me look for her?" "Of course," I promised. "We'll start with what we know and go from there." That evening, Melissa joined us for dinner, bringing files she'd found in the old records room, applications from years past, including one from Jacob's mother seeking assistance with medical bills when Jacob was small. "I thought these might help with the search," she said, placing the folder on the table. "There's contact information here from 15 years ago." "It's a start." Jacob looked at her with surprise. "You're helping with this?" Melissa met his gaze steadily. "Family helps family find answers, even uncomfortable ones. I watched them, these two branches of my family tree, finally growing toward the same light, and felt something like peace settle in my chest." The search for Allison began quietly, with phone calls to old numbers and letters to former addresses. Most led nowhere, but each dead end narrowed the field. Jacob approached it with the same methodical patience he brought to building inspections, one step at a time. No shortcuts, no assumptions. In December, as Portland dressed itself in holiday lights and winter rain, we received a response from a community college in Eugene. Allison Harris had completed a graphic design certificate program there 3 years earlier. They couldn't share contact information, but they agreed to forward a letter from Jacob. He wrote it by hand at my kitchen table, crossing out and rewriting sentences multiple times, weighing each word as if it might tip an invisible scale. "I'm not asking her to come back," he explained as he sealed the envelope. I just want Hannah to have the option of knowing her mother someday. And I want Allison to know that Hannah is okay, that she's loved and safe and thriving. 2 weeks passed without response. Then on a Sunday morning, Jacob's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. He took the call in the garden, standing beneath the bare branches of the apple tree my father had planted decades earlier. Through the window, I watched his face, the careful neutrality, the occasional nod, the way he pressed his fingers to his eyes at one point. When he came inside, his expression was complicated relief and sadness braided together. "She's in Seattle," he said, "working as a designer for a small tech company. She's been sober for 2 years. Sober?" I asked, surprised. He nodded. That was part of it, part of why she left. She'd been struggling with addiction since college, managed to stay clean during pregnancy, but started again after Hannah was born. She left because she was afraid she'd hurt Hannah. The pieces shifted, creating a new picture. Not abandonment as rejection, but as a terrible form of protection. "What happens now?" I asked. "She wants to see a photo," he said. "That's all for now. She says she doesn't deserve more, but she'd like to see what Hannah looks like." "And what do you think?" He was quiet for a moment, processing. "I think healing happens in small steps. This is one." That night, he sent a simple email. Just a recent photo of Hannah in the garden, laughing as fallen leaves swirled around her, her dark curls catching the autumn light. No demands, no recriminations, no pressure for what might come next. Just an open door, left unlocked. A week later, Allison replied with a brief message. "Thank you. She's beautiful. She has your smile." It wasn't reconciliation or reunion. It was acknowledgement, the beginning of a truth that Hannah would someday inherit, along with her grandfather's letter and her place in our family. A truth that included absence but not abandonment, mistakes but not malice. As Christmas approached, Melissa suggested we host a holiday gathering for the tenants in our newest building, a former warehouse, converted to family apartments with a community center on the ground floor. Jacob designed the event with his typical attention to detail. Activities for children of all ages, food that respected diverse traditions, gifts that were useful rather than showy. On the day of the party, as we watched families fill the community room with laughter and conversation, Melissa stood beside me, her expression thoughtful. "This is what grandfather meant, isn't it?" she said. "This is stewardship." I followed her gaze to Jacob, who was kneeling beside an elderly tenant, listening intently as the woman showed him a photograph of her childhood home. "Yes," I said. "This is exactly what he meant." Later, as we packed up leftovers to distribute to residents who couldn't attend, Melissa approached Jacob with an envelope. "I've been meaning to give you this," she said. "It's from the archives. I found it when I was looking for information about Allison." Jacob opened it to find a photograph faded, its edges soft with age. A young man with his eyes and jawline stood beside a river, fishing rod in hand, smile wide and uninhibited. "That's your father," Melissa said. "My Uncle Ethan, he was 19, I think, before he left Portland." Jacob stared at the image, tracing his finger over the face that mirrored his own. "Thank you," he said simply. The words contained multitudes' gratitude, not just for the photograph, but for the acknowledgement, for the place at the table, for the truth finally offered without conditions. That night, as I helped Hannah into her pajamas while Jacob showered, she looked up at me with her father's eyes and said, clear as a bell, "Home. Yes." "Sweet girl," I whispered, my throat tight with emotion. "This is home." Spring came again, blanketing Portland in cherry blossoms and fresh possibility. The Gardner Trust had weathered a year of transformation, not just in leadership, but in purpose. Our buildings still stood solid against the Oregon rain, but what happened inside them had evolved. Community gardens flourished on once vacant lots. Tenant councils formed in buildings where residents had previously been strangers to one another. Maintenance requests were now handled not just promptly, but with dignity, as if each dripping faucet or stuck window mattered, because the people living with them mattered. One warm evening in May, Jacob, Melissa, and I sat on my back porch, watching Hannah chase fireflies across the lawn. She was steady on her feet now, determined and fearless, her curls bouncing with each step. The river beyond the garden glowed with sunset light, and the air smelled of jasmine and possibility. "I got a letter from Ethan," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. Jacob's head snapped up. "My father?" I nodded. The investigator we hired found him in Arizona. I wrote to him 6 weeks ago, and he finally responded. What did he say? Melissa asked, her voice carefully neutral. I pulled the letter from my pocket, 3 pages of cramped handwriting on hotel stationery. He's working as a tour guide at the Grand Canyon. Sober for 5 years. He says he's thought about reaching out many times but was ashamed of how he left things. Jacob's expression was unreadable. Does he know about Hannah? Yes. I told him about both of you in my letter. He says he'd like to meet you, but he understands if you're not ready. Jacob was quiet for a long time, watching his daughter as she discovered a particularly fascinating blade of grass. What do you think I should do? He finally asked. I think, I said carefully, that forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone. But I also think that understanding where you come from helps you know where you're going. People make mistakes, Melissa added unexpectedly. Some of us make really big ones. Her gaze met Jacob's, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. Sometimes we get second chances we don't deserve. Jacob nodded, absorbing this. I'll think about it. The subject shifted, but the letter remained on the table between us. Another bridge waiting to be crossed or burned, another piece of our family puzzle finding its place. A week later, the Portland Business Journal ran a feature on the Gardner Trust's evolution, highlighting our innovative approach to affordable housing and community development. The reporter interviewed tenants, contractors, and board members, creating a comprehensive picture of the changes we'd implemented over the past year. Melissa, Jacob, and I gathered in my living room to read it together, passing sections back and forth with growing excitement. Listen to this, Melissa said, reading aloud. The Gardner approach represents a new paradigm in urban development, one that values community stability over maximum profit and human dignity over market efficiency. They quoted Mrs. Ramirez from the East Side building, Jacob pointed out. For the first time in 20 years, I feel like I have a home, not just an address. I smiled, thinking of my father, how he would have loved seeing his vision not just preserved but expanded, how proud he would have been of these grandchildren, who had found their way to each other despite all the barriers between them. The article concluded with a description of our newest project, a mixed-use development in a historically underserved neighborhood, designed with extensive community input and featuring both affordable housing and small business incubator spaces. The Gardner Trust has rediscovered its soul, the final paragraph read, by remembering that buildings are meant to shelter not just bodies, but dreams. Well, Melissa said, setting down the paper, I guess we did something right. We did a lot of things right, Jacob corrected her, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. And we're just getting started. That summer, Jacob decided to write to his father. The letter wasn't long or elaborate, just an honest account of his life, of Hannah, of the place he'd found in the Gardner family. He included a photograph of Hannah on her birthday and his phone number at the end. No demands, no expectations. Just an open door, Ethan called 3 days later. The conversation was awkward, halting, heavy with years of absence, but it was a beginning. They agreed to meet when Ethan next came to Portland, not at the house, not yet, but at a cafe by the river where the public setting might ease the weight of history between them. When the day arrived, I offered to watch Hannah, but Jacob shook his head. She's part of this story too, he said. And I want him to see what he missed, not to punish him, but so he understands what matters to me now. I watched them leave together, Jacob's shoulders straight, Hannah babbling happily in her stroller, and felt a surge of pride so intense it brought tears to my eyes. Whatever happened at that meeting, Jacob was walking into it as a whole person, not defined by abandonment or discovery, but by the life he'd built and the father he'd become. When they returned hours later, Jacob's expression was complex relief. Sadness, a tentative hope. How was it? I asked. Harder than I expected, he admitted. And easier, too. He's different than I remembered. Older, quieter. Did Hannah warm up to him? A small smile. She offered him a half-eaten cracker, so I'd say she's reserving judgment. We laughed together, and something in the sound felt like healing. Not the dramatic kind that happens in a single cathartic moment, but the gradual kind that comes from choosing connection over resentment, day after day. In September, we held a ceremony at our newest building, not a grand opening with ribbon cutting and champagne, but a community gathering with food prepared by residents and music played by neighborhood children. The plaque beside the entrance read simply, "Welcome Home" in 5 languages. Beneath it, in smaller letters, "The Gardner Trust Building Community since 1947. Jacob, Melissa, and I stood together as residents filed past us into their new home. There was no podium, no speeches. We simply shook hands, learned names, answered questions about thermostats and mail delivery. Margaret arrived with a pot of soup for the community kitchen. Ethan came too, hanging back at first, then gradually joining conversations as Jacob introduced him simply as "my dad." Hannah toddled from person to person, collecting smiles and gentle pats on the head, completely at home in the crowd. When she grew tired, Jacob lifted her onto his shoulders, and she surveyed her kingdom with regal satisfaction. Later, as twilight settled over the city, the 4 of us, Jacob, Melissa, Hannah, and I walked along the riverfront path near my house. Hannah had fallen asleep in her stroller, her cheeks flushed with the exertion of the day. The first stars appeared above us, and lights began to flicker on in houses across the water. "Do you think he'd be proud?" Jacob asked suddenly. "Walter!" My grandfather. I thought about my father, his strict standards, his unwavering principles, his belief that wealth created obligation rather than privilege. "I think," I said carefully, "that he would recognize himself in you." "In both of you," I added, including Melissa. "In different ways." "I wish I'd known him," Jacob said. "In some ways you do," I replied. "Through the buildings he created, through the principles he established, through the letter he left behind." We walked in silence for a while, the river moving beside us, constant and changing all at once. "I've been thinking," Melissa said finally, "about legacy. About what it really means." "And?" Jacob prompted. "I think I had it wrong before," she admitted. "I thought it was about preservation, keeping things exactly as they'd always been. But it's really about evolution, about taking the best of what came before and building on it, adapting it for a new time. Like a house," Jacob suggested. "You keep the good foundation, fix what's broken, add what's needed." "Exactly," Melissa agreed. "Like that." We reached the garden gate as full darkness fell. The porch light glowed welcome, illuminating the path home. Hannah stirred in her sleep, making those small, perfect sounds that reminded us of life's continuous renewal. "A real legacy isn't what you leave behind," I said, remembering my father's words. "It's who you bring inside." Jacob looked up at the house, not a mansion, not a monument, just a home built to shelter generations. "Like a porch light," he said softly. "Not a padlock," Melissa finished. The phrase from Walter's letter, now part of our shared language. We stood together in the gentle circle of light. 3 generations of gardeners finding our way forward, not perfect. Not unmarked by the past, but united in purpose. The truth had freed us. Not by erasing our mistakes, but by allowing us to acknowledge them, to learn from them, to build something stronger in their wake. Hannah sighed in her sleep, reaching out one small hand as if to gather us closer. We moved toward home, toward each other, toward the future we were building together. One brick, one board, one truth at a time.